Hello, everyone. From the Bloomberg team and our partner, UNCF, thank you for joining us. We've come together today for two reasons, really. First, we know that historically black colleges and universities are incredibly effective at developing talent. The data shows it. They train an outsized number of black doctors, engineers, teachers, and judges. So investing in HBCUs really is a smart economic investment in America's future. The second reason we're here is also clear from the numbers. For decades now, HBCUs have not received sufficient funding. Bloomberg Philanthropies is working to help address that historic underinvestment through our Greenwood initiative. We're working closely with HBCUs to increase the number of black doctors in the U.S. and students pursuing STEM PhDs. The results so far are promising, but there is so much more to be done. So to lead that conversation, I'll turn it over to a proud alum of Albany State. She's also Deputy New York Bureau Chief for Bloomberg News, Shatia Brantley.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to HBCUs, The Path to Prosperity, a Bloomberg Equality virtual briefing. HBCUs have been in the spotlight over the past year as the racial reckoning prompted by George Floyd's murder continues to reverberate. Some of these institutions have received huge donations recently. However, these gifts do not make up for the systemic underfunding these institutions have endured for decades. Today, we bring together leaders in education, government, business, and philanthropy to discuss solutions to secure the future of these institutions. Before we get started, a couple of announcements. First, I would like to acknowledge the United Negro College Fund for collaborating with us on today's event. If you experience any issues with audio or video quality, try to refresh your browser or use the chat box in the bottom right corner of your screen for support. You will be able to submit questions during the interviews. We hope you do engage with us. While we're probably not going to get to all of you, we'll try our best. To submit a question, please click open the white tab on the right-hand side of the video window and submit your question. If you note your name and geographical location, we'll give you a shout out. For today's event, we've partnered with Thyssen, an audio-to-text platform that is transcribing today's discussions in real time, making the event more accessible. You can access Thyssen for the real-time transcription via the link in the session description. Please engage with us on social media using #BloombergEquality and engage with other attendees in the event chat in the bottom right corner of your screen. And now we will have opening remarks from Dr. Michael L. Lomax, President and CEO of UNCF, followed by a discussion with Dr. Lomax and Robert F. Smith, founder, chairman, and CEO of Vista Equity Partners with Shonali Bostic, Bloomberg financial correspondent.
Over the last year, America has had a crash course on the importance and impact of historically black colleges and universities, commonly referred to as HBCUs. Just 3% of all American 2- and 4-year colleges and universities. HBCUs enroll 10% of all black college students, produce 17% of all black college graduates, and 25% of all black graduates in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Increasingly, researchers are recognizing that HBCUs for 150 years have been the primary engines of black social and economic mobility, moving generations of low-income, first-time black college-goers from poverty into the middle class by producing 50% of all black teachers, 70% of black doctors and dentists, 80% of black judges. Strikingly, within 10 years of obtaining a degree from an HBCU, the average HBCU graduate earns $71,000 annually. HBCUs have produced a who's who of Black achievers. The first Black Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall. Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Literature laureate, Toni Morrison, and actors and artists too numerous to list. Last year, a new generation of HBCU graduates grabbed headlines for their startling achievements. Howard University alumna Kamala Harris became the first woman elected Vice President of the United States. Morehouse College alumnus Raphael Warnock became the first Black U.S. Senator in history elected from Georgia. And HBCU grads stepped into the spotlights as the mayors of New Orleans, St. Paul, Newark, Atlanta, Birmingham, Montgomery, and Jackson, Mississippi, amid fighting the COVID pandemic and renewed anti-Black violence. 101 public and private HBCUs with 250,000 students have produced these stunning results, even though they are often under-resourced and little known outside of their local communities and the regions of the Sun Belt where they are clustered. At the United Negro College Fund, UNCF, where I am president and CEO, we say that HBCUs punch above their weight. Today's Bloomberg Live event is an opportunity for you, an important and influential audience, to learn more about HBCUs and, I hope, to see in America's historically Black colleges and universities potential partners for business in addressing the challenges of the new economy that is emerging as we continue to wage the battle to subdue and ultimately defeat the COVID pandemic. The emerging economy will need highly skilled 21st century workers in every industry and job category, from entry level to the C-suite. The call to action today is for you to learn more about HBCUs and then for each of us to consider opportunities to further engage, partner with, invest in, and co-produce with HBCUs a stronger economy with more diverse and equitable participation. HBCUs can be extraordinary resources and collaborators with American business today and in the future. For 77 years at UNCF, we have worked with our Black colleges, raised $5 billion to support them and their students, helped over 500,000 students earn college degrees, and every day we have reaffirmed the truth and wisdom of our motto, that is the foundation of all that we do. A mind is a terrible thing to waste, but a wonderful thing to invest in. I hope you will be inspired by HBCUs, the path to prosperity, and join in the work of America's high impact, historically Black colleges and universities.
Thank you to Dr. Lomax for joining us, and thank you to Robert Smith, the CEO, chairman, and founder of Vista, the private equity firm that's known for its software investments. You know, in 2019, it was groundbreaking when you, Robert, had made a commitment to more than 400 students at Morehouse and told them that their debt would be forgiven. Now, I've been told that you keep up with many of those students 2 years later. What are they telling you in terms of how this commitment has been helping them in their careers?
Yeah, a number of things. And so thank you for inviting me and Dr. Lomax on today. And Dr. Lomax and I work on this all the time, which is, how do we liberate our community and liberate the human spirits in our country? And we look at the education of our young people who are part of the United Negro College Fund umbrella, part of the HBCUs. And it's amazing. I have the good fortune of having conversations once a month with, the group of that class. And we do a, multi-hour call just to hear what everyone's doing, how we can be helpful to each other. And the blessing that having no student debt has given them to pursue their opportunities to go to graduate school, to head off to medical school, to start businesses. And frankly, now, look to invest capital that otherwise would have gone back to servicing their student debt into homes and in many cases securities. They formed investment clubs and they are educating each other on, I'll call it the great capitalist society that we have an opportunity to live in. as a participant, not just an observer. And I think that's the key that, myself and Dr. Lomax and his team are focused on, is how do we make sure that all African Americans have a chance to really participate in this economy effectively?
Now, you have poured a lot of money into this initiative, and we've seen since then, since last year, since the murder of George Floyd in particular, a lot of money flow from corporate America into HBCUs. Dr. Lomax, how do we keep this from being one-off contributions to something that's more systemic?
Well, it has to be more sustainable, and it has to continue. It can't just be one-off. But I will say it's a beginning. And that beginning is very important. Last year, by our best estimates, over $500 million in gifts were made to private and public historically Black colleges. That's a kind of capital investment which we've never seen before. One generous donor was responsible for a great deal of that, Mackenzie Scott. And I hope she's really setting a new standard for the way this is going to happen, because the resources that she has given to HBCUs have been that capital that they've gone without for so many decades. It's a beginning point. Also, the federal government made extraordinary investments in HBCUs and minority-serving institutions, and really enabled them to withstand the real challenges of the COVID pandemic, of loss of enrollment, of shutting down. So last year, which we thought would be perhaps the beginning of the end for HBCUs, I hope, is a new beginning for HBCUs.
Speaking of these commitments also and the effort to create systemic change, Robert, you have grown up in an industry that has not been very diverse at all, and is now grappling with not just hiring, but retaining and promoting Black talent within their own ranks. The numbers just do not match up to what we're seeing in society yet, in an industry where they are serving a lot of society, and there are disparities in the way that they serve society as well. So what have you learned, and what can change most meaningfully in the way that corporations are hiring from HBCUs, but also creating the opportunity for these students to succeed?
Sure. I think, as we unpack that, there's just a number of, call it systemic issues that need to be addressed. When I think about the industry that I'm in, there's the financial services industry, there's technology, there's asset management, all of which are woefully underrepresented by African Americans, people of color, and often women. And it's critical that we actually go in and reconstruct new paradigms of opportunity for these groups. For us, for instance, in my company, we focus and we call it a conscious inclusion paradigm. So, and we, from the board level to the C-suite down to entry level. And now I'm proud to even say, 69% of our boards have at least one female member, 85% have at least one person of color. And, that doesn't happen until you just actively decide that this is the right and appropriate thing to do, and put incentives at the board level, at the C-suite level, et cetera. So it's critically important that you build the infrastructure. When you talk about hiring, and this is one of the challenges that African Americans have faced coming out of HBCUs, is ensuring they get the same salaries, the same opportunity set as other students, and often they have even more debt burden, which was one of the challenges. So one of the things we created was the Intern X platform, and Dr. Lomax and his team have been very effective with us. I think we now have over 14,000 students who are HBCU students on this platform. And many of now I think we have 170 corporate partners who now are using that as the platform for, evaluation, hiring. We have over 650 learning modules for these students to actually, gain greater insights as to what those companies do and develop their capacity to be very effective employees as they move into the workforce out of college. So again, you have to think about it in terms of the entire ecosystem, from the time you are coming in school, from internships to when you graduate for your first job, to the teams and the systems for building your career, the mentorships around that, which are things that we focus on as well. Then ultimately, as you think about supporting the entrepreneurs with capital And part of that capital has to come, frankly, through, fund managers like myself. And, I look at our U.S. economy, and less than 1% of the assets are managed by people of color, whereas you have 13, 14, 15% of our economy are African American alone. So those are the sorts of things you have to address at all levels. Again, it's a systemic challenge, but building programs and systems and infrastructure and institutions and supporting institutions, longstanding institutions like the UNCF, I think are one of the critical elements to ensure that we continue to drive forward these opportunities. We as Americans have to understand that the world has become more competitive. Computing power has been distributed. That connectivity of that computing power is ubiquitous. And as a result of that, we have to make sure that every citizen has an opportunity to participate in this digital economy and the new economy, which requires education and access. And I think those are the things that we all need to focus on and bring our resources against.
That's something that you and I have talked about before as well, Dr. Lomax, this idea of the right skills for a future workforce. So as companies are giving these commitments to HBCUs, what else can they offer to make sure that people are ready for this workforce as we struggle with COVID, as we struggle with a digital transformation that's leaving a lot of people out of this economy?
Yeah. This is an issue for higher education. There's a lag between what's taught in the classroom and what's expected in the workplace. And so we really got to close that gap, that knowledge gap. And one of the ways is for companies to come on the campuses more, and the campuses to go on to into companies more, to bring them more proximate to one another. Upskilling and reskilling is going to be a constant of the American workplace. What you learn in college today is not, or learn in high school, or learn in community college today is not going to be sufficient to keep you competitive in the workplace 5 years, 2 years, 3 years from today. So it's a constant change. So this notion that it's one and done with education is just, it's inaccurate. So the first thing to do is to recognize that this issue of lifelong learning, upskilling, reskilling is going to be continuous. 21st century job skills are very different from 20th century job skills. And there's really no job in America today that doesn't involve technology. So that I think that we at historically Black colleges are going to embrace that challenge. And we're going to say that we're bringing career education, lifelong learning, experiential learning, internships into the curriculum at our institutions. But we're also keeping the doors of our institutions open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days out of the year for traditional students and non-traditional students. Because our Black colleges are located in communities with high unemployment rates, where there are lots of people who, are still employable in terms of their age, but are not employable in terms of their skills. And we can't just disregard them. We have to view them as an opportunity to develop that capital.
And Dr. Lomax, to follow up on that point, Mr. Smith has been talking about this potential for hiring, potential for adding talent. But when you look at the numbers, reporting today out by Max Abelson of Bloomberg shows that Goldman Sachs has only added 3 more full-time jobs for students of HBCUs than a year ago. Whereas inside JP Morgan, the numbers actually fell, though the hiring of Black talent has expanded among total campus hiring. So what do you make of these numbers? How do you track the progress that's being made in corporate America when it comes to actually adding talent from these universities that they're investing in?
Well, first of all, these companies have got to be as innovative and committed to diverse employment opportunities and finding the talent that they need as they are to anything else they do. This has got to become a business imperative. It's got to be monitored. It's got to have goals, and it's got to push hard to achieve them. I'm going to give them a little slack for last year because a lot of the infrastructure around employment on Black college campuses and on college campuses declined. I sat through and was a judge at Goldman Sachs business competition for Black colleges. And I'm going to tell you, and the CEO of Goldman Sachs was one of the judges as well, I was blown away by the talent that I saw from Spelman College and Morehouse College and Morgan State and North Carolina A&T. And, I think that there's now an awareness, certainly in the financial industry, that the talent is there. It may need some additional refining and opportunities and experience that you get from internships and mentorships, but the talent is there, and there's no excuse for not achieving your goals.
Robert, speaking of the talent, it was the mid-90s when you joined Goldman as a tech investment banker and have risen and started your own firm. And now, when you look at the top 500 richest people in the world, you are the only Black American. Why is that?
There's a whole host of reasons that we've been addressing here. One is, again, access to education. I had the good fortune of coming from a home where I had two parents who were both educators, and they were insistent that myself and my brother and Frankie, the community we lived in, focused on education, and I saw them dedicate their lives and efforts and resources towards that broader goal. And part of that then leads to the next set of, it's great to have education, but if you don't have access to opportunity, and I think, you all know, my first access to opportunity was an internship at Bell Laboratories when I was 17 years old. And that, of course, changed the direction of my life. You and I talked briefly about one of our good friends, Ray McGuire, who also provided an opportunity for me to enter into the world of investment banking. But when I think about it, it's all these bridges of opportunity that had to somehow be opened or where you have access to them. And it's critically important that we build the infrastructure for those bridges of opportunity. It just doesn't happen. Robert Smiths just don't happen. And it takes a village of people in my community where I grew up to make sure that I performed well in school. And then, an opportunity at Bell Labs, I, of course, had to perform when I was there. I had to perform when I went to college and to graduate school and then on to Goldman Sachs and other places as a professional. And that's it's an important part of being prepared. Now, all that said, you can be as prepared as you want, but if you don't even have access to the door or see it, and I've given some talks to some schools actually in New York City, in the Bronx, with some kids, and I'm saying, listen, if I can make it to Wall Street from Denver, Colorado, you can make it to Wall Street from 173rd Street. So, it's an important part, but they will say, but I don't see the on-ramps. Well, there are institutions that have been built and constructed, and I think we need to continue to open the aperture of what those institutions can provide. One of the things Dr. Lomax talked about was, what HBCUs provide. One of the things we've launched is the Student Freedom Initiative, and beyond the income contingent funding that we provide, we also got capacity from, now Cisco is one of the corporate partners, AVC Technologies, where we're basically upstanding and upskilling all of the infrastructure. So each one of those HBCUs will be compliant with Title IV, so they'll get at least, they stay eligible for the $1 billion in Title IV funding, but more importantly, have broadband. At 4G at a minimum. We'll do some 5G as well on these campuses, every single one. So that opens that aperture. Well, what does that do? It creates the extensibility. You can now provide, learning services, upskilling, reskilling services to a community beyond those students who are on campus. Point number one. Point number two, you have the potential to actually enable businesses, small and medium-sized businesses that are in and around those communities of those schools, to now actually participate in the digital economy in ways that they hadn't before. And utilizing that as a backbone, I think we can expand the opportunity set for African Americans, utilizing our HBCUs as the backbone of, the digital economy and, providing students capability. And oh, by the way, with AVC and also with Cisco, we're providing internships. So as we enable these colleges to become 4G, 5G compliant, we are using interns to train them. So when they leave, when it's upgraded, they now have a real set of skills. Just one other fact, we do a survey across our portfolio, and frankly, the fact of the matter is, current sets of technical skills they perish after about 2.5 years. So there's not that once you graduate, it's not that one skill is going to last forever. So you actually have to have a continuous learning environment as part of the business that you run and or operate, or the school in the community. So it's important that we all think about the paradigm of technology is an evolving one. It's one that also has to be invested in. So it can't be a one shot. It has to build infrastructure and capacity that has the ability to evolve and deliver to the community those evolving skills.
I really do want to get to some of these investments you're making in particular. But before we get there, in 2019, you had made this massive commitment to Morehouse. But then in 2020, there was a more tumultuous year where you had faced some headlines when it came to a tax investigation with the IRS and the DOJ that you have since settled. But how have those headlines impacted you in your business and philanthropic life?
I mean, like anything else, you have to, you move forward. Sometimes you have to deal with some unfair circumstances and address them and move forward. And life is that the way. But that's part of what we also have to teach all of our students and all of our, community that, 400 years being in this country has been unfair to African Americans. And so part of what we have to do, we can sit and complain about it, or we can move forward. And that's a big part of what we have to do is move forward with the allies and the people who believe in the mission and what we're doing. And frankly, I think we've been quite effective in the expansion of opportunity for all of our community.
And in terms of moving forward, how are you moving forward in terms of your conversations with your donors, your investors, and your philanthropic commitments?
Again, you move forward, you make investments, and you keep driving things forward.
I think this is also an important question for you because in your industry, primarily private equity, we're looking at a lot of firms who are investing in companies, and you've cited the lack of access to capital. When it comes to Vista, has it been an instance in which you've been able to invest in a lot of Black-owned businesses throughout your history at Vista, or has much of that investment come through your philanthropic life? How should folks be thinking about this moving forward and the business opportunity that can come with investing in Black-owned businesses?
Vista invests in software and technology businesses, again, enterprise software. So one of the largest investments that we've made in an African-American owned software company, we made it over $200 million. I mean, from our perspective, we look at tens of thousands of companies a year, some of which are African-American owned. There are very few, independently African-American owned technology businesses, which is something that has to change. And the fact of the matter is, what we have to focus on is finding the best businesses that support our stakeholders. Our stakeholders now over 50% of the teachers and the pension funds in the United States. And it's important that we have the best investments with the lowest loss ratios as part of our investment process. And we look at companies we've made an investment that's going to be announced. I think it's announced today in a business that's owned by two Latinos. And I think that is going to be the largest over $1 billion transaction, one of the largest investments in a Latino run business.
So Dr. Lomax had hinted at this before, and you've written about this with Ursula Burns and Ariel's John Rogers about the responsibility of the Biden administration to do more when it comes to leveling the playing field for Black-owned businesses and Black entrepreneurs more generally. So if you had one main message to send to the administration on what they ought to be doing to level the playing field, what would that be?
Who's that question for? Is it?
Start that you can take the first stab at that, Dr. Lomax.
Well, I'm going to say this about the Biden administration. The Biden administration doors are wider open to historically Black colleges than I have ever seen them in the 50 years that I have been in higher education. And I will tell you, while we do meet with the Secretary of Education, and we've met with the Secretary of Education, the HBCU community every quarter, throughout the last 3 administrations. We meet at the White House with the Biden administration as well. And we know that they're viewing everything they do in domestic policy through an equity lens. And, very important legislation right now that will address both deeper investments in HBCUs, but also opportunities for minority-owned businesses. And that is the infrastructure work that they're proposing. And there's a big section of that which called Ignite, which will be focused on historically Black colleges and rebuilding old buildings, getting the kind of equipment that's needed to ensure that students are learning with the right equipment, and important, as Robert has said, broadband. But I don't think there's an administration in recent memory that has worked more effectively with historically Black colleges, and also, where historically Black colleges are embraced by a bipartisan support in the Congress. So we see this as central to accelerating the improvement, the impact, and the reach and scaling of historically Black colleges.
And similarly, Robert, while there's a lot of effort and a lot of money and a lot of progress that is being shown in the last few months, do you have any concerns that that momentum won't be kept up? And if not, then why? I mean, what evidence do you have of a great lasting change?
That's a great question. I don't know if I have evidence of a great lasting change. What we have to do is work every day. I am hopeful. One of the things that I'm excited about is that at least in the infrastructure bill, there's $65 billion set aside to expand broadband access, and I'm hopeful that it gets to the right places. I look to places like India, and Mukesh Ambani, a friend of mine, has actually gotten 4G. That's 1.3 billion people now have the capacity. He has about 400 million on his system today. And, if we can get 400 million people up on a system, I'd be surprised why we can't get 42 million Americans who currently don't have access to high-speed broadband internet. And fact of the matter is a disproportionate number of them are Black and Native American and Latino. And to me, there is an opportunity. It's here, it's now. And, but you have to drive and you have to fight for it every single day. If we don't get those communities connected, I think we're going to see an expansion in the disparity of wealth, and an expansion in the disparity of income, and frankly, expansion and disparity of opportunity going forward. And we need these folks to be competitive. We need them participating in the digital economy fully, not just tangentially at the edge.
And with a minute left, what is your message for corporations? Because as far as participating in the economy, we are still sitting with an unemployment rate that is unequal, and even more so since the crisis. So what is your message to business leaders in their role in equaling the playing field?
Yeah, to me, I think it is, multi-dimensional. Part of it is they have to invest in the infrastructures that are existing. We have the Southern Q Communities Initiative that I'm leading with BCG, Rich Lesser there, and also Dan Schumann over at PayPal, and looking to address, a lot of the inequities in broadband, in the access to capital, in part of that initiative, as we drive that forward, requires local support of the large corporations who are participating in those economies, through their employees or through their consumers. And as you think about these 6 cities, you do a 100-mile radius, you get to 50% of the African-American population. And, we have real partners, real infrastructure that can actually change the entire economic ecosystem in each of those cities for those communities. And so take a hard look at that and put resources, time, energy, people, and dollars against it. And I think we can make a huge difference in the next 2 to 3 to 4 years.
Right. Well, I thank you both for both of your time. I hope we can have this conversation a year from now and see what those hiring numbers look like across industries. Keep posted. And thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jennifer Zabasadja, an anchor and reporter at Bloomberg Quick Take and Bloomberg News here in New York. Thank you so much for joining us and continuing this conversation about HBCUs and the path to prosperity. As we know, charitable giving to higher education institutions is not created equal, but it can, and it will take a lot of work. And I'm really fortunate to be joined by these 2 individuals who have put in a lot of the work and have helped sort of kickstart what we're hoping is the future of charitable giving and contributions to HBCU. So I want to bring in Martha Karsh. She is the founder of the Karsh Family Foundation, and also Charles Phillips, managing partner and co-founder of Recognize. Thank you both so much for being here. Charles, I want to just start with you. I want to talk about what were some of the gaps that you were noticing in charitable giving to HBCUs, and how did that influence your approach to giving back to these institutions?
Yeah, well, it started for me. I went to business school at Hampton University and have seen it, up close. My father went there as well, and the recurring theme was the number of people dropping out of an HBCUs because they simply did not have enough financial aid to get through. Their parents tended not to have the same wealth and intergenerational wealth as other schools, perhaps. And so they're more likely to borrow most of what they need for college. And so it was just painful to watch that over and over again. People with aptitude, with motivation, but after 2 years, the family runs out of money, and then the worst thing happens. They leave, but they have 2 years worth of college debt with no job. And so that cycle I saw many, many years. And so we tried to intercede and see if we could do something different. Fortunately, now a lot of people recognize it, given, post George Floyd, people want to help. And I guess the thing is to channel it into that one issue. I mean, there are other issues as well, but just basic scholarship and money to get through college, that's still a big issue. A lot of people drop out simply for financial aid.
And so how did that then influence your approach to giving back?
Yeah, well, I personally also am friends with both the presidents of Morehouse and Spelman, so that was easy for me to do. They find me when they need me, and so I endowed a chair there at Spelman already. That's just me personally, but there were other things I wanted to do beyond my own personal giving, and one of the things was when people do graduate from one of these colleges, can they get connected to employers? And they need to get connected earlier so they know what their choices are. You don't know what to major in or what industries are possible if no one's shown you that. And so we had this sequence where people would graduate in disciplines that did not lead to economic prosperity. A lot of studies, sociology, theology. If you want to do that, that's fine, but to recognize the impact of what that's going to have on earnings power down the road. If you don't know about chemical industries or many other industries, you don't think of that. And so what we've been doing is getting the companies engaged earlier, and also encouraging entrepreneurship while they're still in school, so they understand how it works, what their options are, and then they can make an informed decision by the time they graduate.
And Martha, I want to bring you in here. You have 20 years of philanthropic. You've been giving for 20 years. Talk to us about how your giving over the past 20 years really led you back in 2020, beginning of 2020, to provide Howard with the biggest endowment that they had ever received. What led you to the school?
So you're right. We've been at this for 20 years, and probably maybe unlike Charles, I came to this area a little bit more organically. When my husband and I started our family foundation in 1998, we decided the focus would be education. And at the time, it was a fairly simple vision. We thought education is one of the greatest levers, maybe the greatest levers in philanthropy for making a difference. You give kids an opportunity for a great education. It changes their life. It changes the life of their families. It changes the life of communities. So settled on that. And then we focused on what were the great organizations and institutions we could support. And early on, more than 20 years ago, we discovered in the K-12 area, Teach for America and KIPP, which is one of the really the largest and best public charter schools across the country now. And at higher education, so that was our K-12 bucket. At higher education, we were just looking at universities that really understood financial aid. They understood that there were a lot of talented kids out there who lacked only resources. So that was our early focus. And along the way, what we discovered is that what really influences your philanthropic direction and decisions are the people you meet. So early on, we met Wendy Kopp, who was a visionary at Teach for America, Richard Barth, who, along with Don Fisher, were early developers of the KIPP program when it was in its infancy. We met Dick Broadhead at Duke University, Amy Gutman at Penn, and a whole host of others. And along the way, those people made it very clear to us that you find great institutions, great organizations, you find them run by incredibly talented, visionary people, you give them the money and get out of the way. And that was just a very successful formula, because if you're at the right place with the right people, all kinds of good things happen. So along the way, in a panel really not unlike this, it was at a KIPP school summit. I was the moderator, and I was interviewing college presidents, and one of the college presidents was Beverly Tatum, who is Mary Schmidt Campbell's predecessor as the president of Spelman. And Beverly and I just hit it off, not only in the panel, but afterwards. And she invited me to come see Spelman. And I admit that at that time, I really had limited knowledge and expertise about HBCUs. But really all it took was meeting Beverly, who is just a phenomenal human being, going to Spelman and getting the opportunity. And we actually went for one of their very traditional and historic events they do every year, the holiday concert in Sisters Chapel with the Morehouse men. And just seeing these young people and the sisterhood that was formed at Spelman, and how strong of a support network it was, not only during their college years, but afterwards, during that really critical time when you're developing your career and you need that network, and how strong that network was. So it was also a really popular placement for our KIPP women across the country. So we started with Beverly, created scholarships for KIPPsters at Spelman. They were phenomenally successful. And so we continued to re-up, and then along came Mary Schmidt Campbell, same kind of quality, extraordinary woman who, has really led Spelman to wonderful places, as did Beverly. And we've continued that investment. So this is a long way around of saying that's how I came to HBCUs, but having had this experience with these great organizations and these great people, I thought, it's actually, my husband and I both thought, it's time to expand that support. And so I went to my longtime friend and colleague, Michael Lomax, who is the head of UNCF, longtime head, and really an icon in the education world. And I said, where else should we go? And he said, I want you to meet somebody. And so he introduced us to Wayne Frederick, the president of Howard. Bruce and I were just blown away with how, again, visionary, impressive. He's a cancer surgeon. He's the president. He, went to college when he was 15. He's just an extraordinary human being. And we asked him, what is your top priority? And what he said really aligns with a lot of what Charles was saying. He said, really, what we want is to motivate STEM scholars here at Howard. We want to attract the best and the brightest in the African-American community across the country. They want to come to Howard. The history, the legacy, the tradition is all here. And we lack only the money, the resources. So it honestly did not take very much to convince us. We were impressed with Howard, with Dr. Frederick, with the program, with the quality of the kids he had already attracted. And we decided to step up and endow that program, honestly not knowing until after we had made our commitment that it was the largest individual gift at the time that Howard had ever received. And it, like our investment at Spelman, has just been an extraordinary opportunity to change lives, because the students in this program are amazing. They are a pipeline to PhD, MD programs beyond. They're going to change the future of healthcare in the African American world. They're leaders in and of themselves. So you're really seeding the next generation of diverse leaders in many disciplines, but particularly in medicine.
Right. And Charles, just bouncing off of what Marcia just said, both of your experiences really sort of highlight how important it is to have that person-to-person connection and engage with people in the HBCU community and not just write a check. I wonder, Charles, if you can speak to the value in that and what you've been able to find.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I went to high school in Atlanta. My dad was in the military, got stationed there. But prior to that, I was living all over the world and hadn't seen any Black people that owned a business. It's just because I was living on bases in Spain and Germany, different places. So when I got to Atlanta and I saw all these Morehouse men who were running businesses and started meeting, I mean, it's just something I had never seen before. So it certainly changed my perspective on what was possible. I didn't know Black people were running businesses that large. And so I think that same thing happens to any young person at that age. If they are around someone who could influence their thinking, kind of paint a broader picture of what's possible, you start to get motivated. Oh, I can do that too. So that's what this is all about. So a lot of the programs I'm involved in are exactly that, trying to connect the students with people who are doing things that are amazing, that look like them as well. Or if they don't look like them, educate them on what's possible. So I think I referenced the Center for Black Entrepreneurship that I helped establish with the Black Economic Alliance on the campus of Morehouse and Spelman. And what that's designed to do is get a lot of the venture capitalists from around the country to show up and share their expertise on how you build a business, what they look for, how do I finance businesses, how do you recruit the right talent, all of the things that business building skills that they have. That's not obvious to you if you haven't been around that. And so they're going to be participating in this effort. And we've raised about $70 million for that effort. So as the kids come up with ideas, we want a fund there, an evergreen fund, to invest in those ideas and circulate it back into the fund. So both the presidents of Morehouse and Spelman were used to tell me all the time they have great ideas that people come up with. They don't know what to do with them. There's nowhere to go. They don't have the relationships because the VCs are all in California. And so you have to have some proximity for things to happen. So we're inviting them to come on campus and not only teach classes, but like I say, invest in the ideas as well. So that has started this month, and we're pretty excited about how that's going. And we're going to see how it goes, get it up and running, and then try to take that to other HBCUs. And more importantly, you don't have to be a student to participate. There will be an online version of this. And so other Black entrepreneurs who want to get in on this, that's the long-term goal. But we thought this was a place to start, Atlanta, because I knew it so well and knew both presidents. And there's a whole history of Black entrepreneurship and businesses to influence people. That was a fertile ground to kind of try this idea. And hopefully we'll see how it goes.
How do you encourage more of your peers, Martha, to do similar, take similar steps that you and Charles are taking? I mean, when we talk about endowments, we can just look at Ivy League schools versus HBCUs, and the gap is huge, right? And so how do you encourage more people like yourselves to take similar actions? What are the conversations that you're having?
Well, it's such a good question, and anybody that knows me knows I'm really tough to quiet on this topic, because I think it starts with really authentic connection. Let's just take HBCUs as an example. I mean, here you have this, what I believe has been a vastly overlooked talent pool for a long time. And I think your mention of, the disparity in endowments is really important. Let's look at that for a second. Howard, which is one of the top HBCUs, has the largest endowment of any HBCU, and it's somewhere between $700 and $800 million. And then you look at Yale, predominantly white institution, and their endowment is $30 billion or more. So the fact is, you have you have some of these HBCUs who have talent just as effective and with as much opportunity, with as much to offer as these predominantly white institutions, but vastly fewer resources. So right there, you can just see that that's a need. And, Bruce and I in our work are really drawn to need, talent, and opportunity. So I just tell people that disparity, think about it. Think about why that is the case, because it's graduates that are generally the source of endowment. Endowments over the past 20, 30, 40 years have increased enormously because of investment income. But if you didn't have the money to begin with, you couldn't create these huge endowments. And the money that's thrown off by endowments is what provides the resources at these institutions. So it's a place to go to, let's say, correct years of lost opportunity among African Americans who were really closed out of some of these really lucrative areas and really were unable to give back to their universities in the same way. And I think that brings it back to one of the things that Charles said, which is let's look in this new day and age for ways we can change, not just supporting the institutions, which I do think is really important, but also more innovative programs like what he's talking about. And one of those that I had mentioned to you before is this program called Alt Finance, which is the brainchild of Tony Ressler, who runs Ares, also in Atlanta. He lives in Atlanta. And also my husband, who heads Oak Tree Capital, and also Apollo. So 3 kind of powerhouse organizations that are in the alt investment field. And this program they've developed serves really 2 goals. One is to increase, their talent pool in that alt investment field, and number 2, to find it at HBCUs. So they've teamed up with 4 HBCUs: Howard University, Clark Atlanta, Morehouse, and Spelman. And they've created, along with those 4 HBCUs and with Wharton, what they call a virtual institute, which is this great curriculum in investing, particularly in the alt invest world, which includes entrepreneurship and other just alternative investment strategies. And in addition to that curriculum, which is open to everyone, they've created fellowships. So when it's fully realized, there'll be around 75 fellows each year distributed among those 4 universities. And those fellows will have scholarships, and they'll also have something maybe equally valuable, which is opportunities for internships in the summer at these organizations, at these companies, and mentoring and coaching and networking that maybe they haven't had before. Maybe they didn't know that this was a career path they could follow. So I think it's really going to be a virtuous cycle for both the companies and the students and the HBCUs.
So Mark,
Charles, I'd love to get your take on
those. Yeah, so Tony Ressler is a co-owner of the Hawks with my business partner. So my business partner introduced me to him, and Tony's been helping us at the Center for Black Entrepreneurship as well. So that same group is helping the effort that I talked about earlier, which brings me to the point, just integrating some of these efforts so we know who's doing what and trying to get some leverage. And so we can leverage what they're doing, the internship programs, because some of those same people will be starting businesses as well. We want them to be participating in the Center for Black Entrepreneurship. And so we're in discussions right now on how to integrate some of that. But I think it's a great effort. And the broader point, though, is we need to expose these students to some of the great industries where wealth is created. And certainly technology is one. So we're doing that on the Center for Entrepreneurship and trying to get those involved. But financial services and Wall Street and alt finance is another that is just something people didn't know about. And so to the extent that they can educate a lot of people, they don't all have to end up working there, but some will. If you want to have wealthy graduates who can give later, they need to be in industries that create wealth. And so I just think it's a great effort. They got it organized really well. I've gone through the details with them. Tony's presenting, gone through all what they set up pretty quickly, very organized as he always is. And so these are the right firms to do that. And like, this is not the secondary, these are the A-class players that are doing this with these HBCUs. So I'm very hopeful and excited about what they're doing.
Absolutely, especially when you talk about intergenerational wealth as well. It's important.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I wanted to add to that, Charles. First of all, I've known Tony for 25, 30 years. And, you know, he's such an amazing human being on, you know, aside from all of his business success. He's been in this education field longer than we have, and has really been inspirational to us. And what I also see is that when you take three powerhouse organizations like Oak Tree, Apollo, and Aries, and some of these top HBCUs they're aligning with, what you do is you set the stage. Not that this is going to be the first, the only thing, but they're leaders and they're first movers, and they're going to show the world what can be done. And so I'm actually really proud of this group for putting this together. They've put $90 million towards this, and their vision is that, assuming success, which I am completely confident will happen, they hope to take this much wider and include far more finance firms and far more HBCUs.
I'd love to get from here, Charles. I'd love to get, we have a question from the audience that I think
earlier. No, go ahead.
I'd love to get your take just in these final few minutes we have on this question from the audience, which I think is so important. What are some of the ways to engage HBCU graduates to be able to give back and contribute if they're not able to, if they're not with a firm and able to, you know, contribute in the millions? What are other ways that you both would encourage to really help disrupt the philanthropic system? Charles?
Well, they can use their relationships, even if they can't contribute personally. Introducing the idea of getting their companies engaged with recruiting from these schools is one idea. Secondly, going back to Martha's point earlier on the endowments, one of the reasons the endowments are so small is they didn't have access to these great VCs back in the 80s and 90s when technology was booming. And so all that took was an introduction. I introduced them to, I won't say their name, one of the top ones in the world in technology, who hadn't opened up their fund in 15 years to anybody new, but they decided they would for this. And so just using your relationships to say, can you talk to the president of Spelman or Howard, and this is what they're after, that will help grow the endowments. It didn't cost anything, but it's just a relationship. So things like that, people may not have means, but they have other ways of helping.
Martha, you got your final take?
Yeah, I'll say that we actually take that head on because we try to meet with our scholarship students, and we now have hundreds, if not thousands, at various universities. And we meet with them, they're always a little bemused by the fact that somebody who didn't know them was willing to back them. So, and what we always say is, just give back. Our philosophy is influenced by our Jewish heritage, Tikkun Olam, heal the world. And everybody can do their part in whatever way they can give back. They can, as Charles said, they can, mobilize their networks. At Oak Tree, I think my voice caused the whole company to form Our Communities Matter and reach out just in the community here in Los Angeles. You can always speak up. You can always talk about ways to make a difference, and that's how it happens.
Absolutely, and I love how both of you talked about authenticity because that's so important as well for all of us. All right, we're gonna have to leave it there. Martha Karsh, Charles Phillips, thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, it's a great pleasure to welcome everyone to this panel discussion on HBCUs. I'm Brett Pulley, the Atlanta Bureau Chief at Bloomberg News. The role that HBCUs play in our society and our economy is paramount. While representing 3% of all four-year colleges and universities, HBCUs produce 17% of all bachelor degrees awarded to African Americans. Additionally, HBCUs enroll a disproportionately high percentage of first-generation and low-income students, and they outperform other institutions in supporting and graduating these students. We've heard much of the tremendous number of gifts that have gone to HBCUs in the aftermath of the social unrest last year. Yet even with the generous gifts in recent months, the funding need remains overwhelming for many HBCUs. In fact, the endowments of all 101 historically Black colleges and universities now total just $3.4 billion, according to the College Fund. As Bloomberg's higher education writer Janet Lauren recently wrote, that total amount is less than the endowment of a single Ivy League school, the poorest Ivy League school, Brown University. And with that, I think it's a perfect segue to our most distinguished panel. I'm honored, first of all, to welcome the president of Spelman College, Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell. Also, please welcome Asahi Pompey, the global head of corporate engagement and president of the Goldman Sachs Foundation. Also, we're honored to be joined by Dr. Walter Kimbrough, the president of Dillard University in New Orleans. And last but not least, please welcome Dr. Ruth Simmons, who is the former president of the aforementioned Poor Ivy, Brown University, and is the current president of Prairie View A&M University in Texas. Welcome, everyone. And Dr. Simmons, I'll start with you. As the president of Smith College prior to Brown and of Brown University, you've certainly led some of the nation's most distinguished institutions. And at Prairie View, you've had really a great success at fundraising. How would you characterize the current financial state of HBCUs, and why is there this tremendous funding gap?
Well, thank you very much. Hello to all of my colleagues. I'm very pleased to be with you all. First of all, I have to always remind people that the HBCU sector is quite diverse. And so we should talk about them as if they are, in fact, diverse. Some are reasonably well funded, some are very poorly funded, some are outstanding institutions, some of them are struggling. At Prairie View, I'm a native Texan and returned to Texas to lead Prairie View. And I tend not to try to compare institutions. Each of us has a mission. And as educators, we try to focus on our mission and fulfill that mission to the best possible degree. We obviously have different historical backgrounds. We have different purposes in some regards. We have different fields that we mount. And we're always trying to manage in the context of all of those things that we're trying to do. So what are the factors for HBCUs? First of all, places like Smith and Brown have had many, many decades of very well-heeled alumni supporting them. And that means wealthy students come to those institutions. They commit to funding those institutions after they leave. And they do things like leave money for them in their wills. They give major gifts. They give leadership gifts. And that's a continuous process that has built up over time, leading them to be very wealthy institutions. Obviously, with those funds, they can do a good deal. At Prairie View, we're a state institution. We rely on the largesse of the state government and the state legislature. It's a tough state to do that in because legislators here don't always understand the unique purpose of our institution and don't always support the things that we want to advance. And so we dwell in a political context as a state institution. and that has its limitations. So I would say that we have had some luck recently raising money thanks to the conditions that exist today, but we are nowhere near where we need to be in order to mount the programs that we wish to have to support our students.
Yes. That the point you just made about the fact that you guys are a state institution, and not all HBCUs are. It's something I want to make sure that we circle back to. It certainly is a critical distinction. One of the things that I'd like us to also talk a bit about is each year the federal government disperses about $1 billion to HBCUs through a mix of programs such as Pell Grants and research and development contracts. Under the American Rescue Plan, just recently, the Department of Education earmarked $1.6 billion to HBCUs, and additionally, they have I think $577 million has been awarded through the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, the CARES Act. And then there's been some debt relief that the federal government has provided, et cetera, to HBCUs. And so it brings me to the question I'll ask you, this Dr. Kimbrough. In addition to the tremendous number of private gifts, or certainly the increase in private gifts that we've seen lately, how would you characterize the amount of federal support that HBCUs are receiving? Is it historic? Is it enough? And what kind of difference does this additional funding make for students at Dillard and other HBCUs?
So it is, if you look at it from the historical context, this amount of money is historic. Of course, with some of the CARES Act funding, some went directly to students, as we had in all of higher education. There were some additional funds set aside specifically for HBCUs that was to provide some support for the institutions, which I think is very valuable. The debt relief, of course, we experienced some debt relief based on Hurricane Katrina, but there are a number of institutions that receive debt relief as well. So all of those things are really good for this period of time. I think what we're looking for long term is to say, how then do we institutionalize some of this money for a longer period of time? If you look at President Biden's skinny budget, he really requests a huge increase in the amount of money through the Title III program. That would be great if we can make that permanent every year. So those are the kinds of things, because, as I always say, HBCUs, even with the entire spectrum, as Dr. Simmons talked about, there is a lot of diversity, but we still are comparatively underfunded institutions that serve underfunded people. Even institutions that have the smallest number of Pell Grant eligible students are many more Pell students than the average number of college students nationally. So we've got to continue to have these kind of resources, and particularly when we're addressing some of the issues in terms of the wealth inequality in this country. So we've seen in the last couple of years some great investments, wonderful investments, but I think then we've got to continue these. And so with the president's initial budget salvo, if we can continue to build on that, that would be great for HBCUs.
Yes. It's almost as if this season that we've been in of great largesse, we don't need it to be just seasonal, right? This is something that the institutions need on a regular basis. Dr. Campbell, as the president of Spelman, you're at one of the HBCUs that has received many of the individual gifts over the past year and a half. I'd like, if you would, to talk specifically about the role that corporations can play in funding higher education at HBCUs. I know that you guys at Spelman received or in some sort of partnership with Google. Can you talk a bit about that and the amount of money and how that evolved?
Sure, Brett, I'd love to talk about that. But first, I want to comment on Dr. Simmons' wonderful overview of HBCUs and just underscore what she and also Dr. Kimbrough said about the underfunding that has been historical. Because despite that underfunding, despite that wealth gap, that financial gap, what is also striking about HBCUs is that we do have assets. And those assets show up in the form of our faculty who are extraordinarily committed. They show up in the form of alumni who form these steel trap networks all over the country. They show up in the students themselves who come to us with this extraordinary faith. And so I say that to say, when we do get financial investments, the return is tremendous because we already have these assets that are set up for these affirming assets that are set up for student success. It has been gratifying to be a recipient of some of the corporate largesse. Morehouse and Spelman, for example, were able to launch a Center for Black Entrepreneurship with a $10 million gift from Bank of America. And the reason was, it wasn't an episodic gift that was going to fund a program here and a program there. It was actually to endow faculty. We can actually hire faculty who will be at the college permanently and whose gift will give years, decades from now. Google also had a rough start, but then rethought their investment and came back and made unrestricted gifts, generous gifts, $5 million each to 10 institutions, which enabled us to take those funds and put them where we believed they needed to be for the growth and permanent capacity building of our institutions. So I have to say, I'm very encouraged by these corporations that are enlightened and who have this openness to understanding what it means to build capacity. And I think that augurs very well for the future.
Yes. Yeah, those the unrestricted gifts are really critical, right? I mean, who knows better than those of you who are running these institutions what the needs are, right? And those
that was what was so wonderful about the Mackenzie Scott gifts that we received. They were totally and completely unrestricted. That really was quite extraordinary.
And I think it's important to say, just to be honest, it hasn't always been true that these institutions had sufficient confidence in the judgment of leaders of our institutions, that they were willing to do that. Quite the contrary. And so their gifts in the past have been quite limited. They've been small. They've come with all kinds of strings attached because, after all, they're led by people like us. And so, it takes a lot to wash away the blight of discrimination. And we're still living with it. And so corporations come, they are very well-meaning in offering to do things, but I'm encouraging my colleagues to talk frankly with donors about the respect that our institutions need to command. And when we know that they're going across town to a white institution and making a very generous, unrestricted gift, and they come to us and make a very limited gift with a short-term gift with all kinds of restrictions, that's tantamount to continuing a tradition of mistreatment for African-American institutions. And we must not stand for it. And so we have to stand up to them and say, I'm very sorry, but that won't do.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's like the Allison Scott Mackenzie gift set a new standard in a few ways, right? I mean, in terms of the amount, but also in terms of demonstrating the kind of trust that, and belief in the institutions and the leadership. Asahi, I'd like to just maybe change the track just a bit for a while and talk about the end game for these students, right? The end game is jobs and careers and earning and building wealth and closing this yawning wealth gap that we're faced with in this country. On Wall Street, firms have recently greatly increased their interest, certainly in HBCU students and recruiting at HBCUs, But as my colleague Max Abelson reported last week, progress is slow. Goldman Sachs, he reported, nearly double the number of HBCU interns to 37 this last year. But ultimately, graduates landed just 3 more full-time jobs at the firm than they did the previous year. So what are firms like Goldman doing to enhance HBCU representation among the workforce and to elevate these employees to senior ranks once they're inside?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say thank you. And I agree with a lot of the comments obviously made by Dr. Simmons, Dr. Campbell, and Dr. Kimbrough. In terms of, what I think Wall Street and Goldman's just one example is doing, I think it's sort of threefold. One is getting students earlier and demystifying Wall Street. And what we mean by that is we launched a program last year, and this is just one example, called HBCU Market Madness, where we partnered with a number of HBCUs to literally get freshmen and bring them into Goldman Sachs. This year, obviously, it was verbally. But we think that the vision is to get early access, early opportunity, help Goldman Sachs understand these students early, and frankly, to demystify what it's like to be an analyst at Goldman Sachs, what's an LBO model, and to do that at the stage of freshman. Because frankly, in order to get a job when you graduate from school, you've got to be part of the summer program when you're a junior, which means you've got to be thinking about us when you're a sophomore, and effectively know about us, thinking about us when you're a freshman. And so that is sort of not happening in the way that it should. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is really get in there early, and as early as the freshman year has been one of the key things that we've been doing. The other thing that we've launched and others, are doing sort of similar things is really having a summit at Goldman Sachs for HBCU students. Specifically, we were the first corporation to do that back in 2017. And that's another way of getting, frankly, our management at Goldman Sachs more access and having them really see the students and what they can do. But a lot of this really comes down to demystifying it and, frankly, just getting the numbers higher. We simply need to hire more students. This year, we've increased that by 85%. Our summer class increased by 85% the number of HBCU students that are part of the summer class. We've made aspirational goals. And the other thing we've done, Brett, is we've made those goals public, right? So our CEO has gone out and said, this is what we're looking to do. We're going to double our hiring from HBCUs by 2025. By the end of this year, we're increasing our hiring from the schools that we're recruiting from to 25 schools by the end of this year. And so making clear goals, making those goals public, and being, frankly, accountable. Putting yourself out there to be accountable, held accountable internally, because our employees internally are asking those questions, right? Similar to what Dr. Campbell said, that these movements happen internally. That's what we're seeing here as well, where our people are saying, what's our numbers as it relates to HBCU students? How can we make that better?
I love the Market Madness competition that was among the 8 HBCUs and the teams that participated. Not only did the winners benefit, but every single member of those teams really had a chance to understand what that kind of financial analysis, how that kind of financial analysis could pay off. I thought that was a great way to pull them in.
And how fantastic that Spelman was the winning team.
Yes, that was good too.
Throw that in there. Here's one thing I would say. From that program, we already have, as of this morning, I checked on it, 22 HBCU students that have accepted jobs to come to work at Goldman Sachs over the summer. And so we need to we need to scale that.
Yes. Asahi, you mentioned accountability. Are you guys tying compensation at all to meeting those goals?
Certainly compensation, diversity more generally, compensation is tied to diversity. That's one of the metrics that we look at, sort of managers, how they're managing to those targets. Absolutely, it's part of the calculation.
It's great. And some of those goals are HBCU specific, not just diverse, but HBCU. Yeah. Terrific.
HBCU specific.
Yes. Dr. Simmons, you mentioned earlier, you made the distinction about Prairie View being a state school. Spelman, of course, is private. Dillard is state, right?
No.
Is that right, Dr. Kim?
We're private too.
Oh, you're private as well. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting that, I'll tell you, I was a dean at a private school, Hampton University, and I'll tell you a very quick story that kind of underscores the difference. The school that I was a dean of, the Scripps Howard School of Journalism and Communications, however many years ago, the woman who was the president of the Scripps Howard Foundation arrived on campus. She told the president, Dr. Harvey, I have $10 million. We want to build a journalism school. Dr. Harvey walked out of his office with her. They walked about a half a block. He said, we'll put it right there. Deal was done. That won't happen at a state school. Part of the challenge is that state governments have long discriminated, as you pointed out, against Black students in the colleges they attend. And a recent audit in Tennessee revealed that from 1957 to 2007, the state there failed to meet its legal obligation to match federal and land grant funding of its Black college, Tennessee State University, by more than $500 million. And according to one estimate, Maryland, over the past century, has shorted its public colleges, its Black public colleges, I should say, by at least $2.7 billion. So, Dr. Simmons, as a president of a state institution, how has this impacted your college historically? And in what ways does the state's oversight impact your ability to garner philanthropic dollars and use them as you see necessary?
Well, the point that I've tried to make, I mean, we're in a very felicitous situation right now. We're a member of the Texas A&M University system. We enjoy considerable support as a part of that system. But here's what people fail to understand, because, we are a nation of forgetting. And following the emancipation of slaves and the end of the Civil War, people thought that the righteous thing to do was to simply forget about the history and to move forward. Well, the problem with that is that the losses, the lack of funds get compounded over time. So we were founded in 1876 in the same year that Texas A&M was founded. But for so much of our history, we were supposed to be less than, because African Americans were thought to be less than and did not need the same quality of education as whites going to school at Texas A&M. So naturally, over decades of lost funds, we are still living with the legacy of that. To catch up would be extraordinary. We'll never catch up, basically. And so what I often say to people to help them understand why they should care about this is that this legacy of underfunding has carried forward in the way that wealth disparity has carried forward. Enslaved and without wages, in the follow-up to slavery, not having certain rights to citizenship and not being able to earn what one's talents deserved, all of that led to a compounding of the gap between whites and Blacks. So if you look at HBCUs versus other institutions of similar age, you have to look at the compounding of that difference and understand. So I have charged in my commencement speech this year to Harvard, I charged institutions like Harvard with finally getting that, understanding that they had had the wind at their back for all of these years, flourishing at will. Whereas HBCUs have faced gale force winds, trying to survive in spite of enormous odds and opposition. And so I believe that higher education itself has an obligation to HBCUs to help recover some of the loss that HBCUs have suffered as a consequence of having been treated so differentially over all this time. I'm very hard on people. I'm sorry for that. But you see, we'll never get out of this if we don't tell the truth about it. So the truth telling is a very important function for us right now in this moment, in this window. We must own up to what has transpired, and we must say, what can we do to correct that?
And what makes what Dr. Simmons is saying so enraging is that if you look at the outcomes of HBCUs, they are oversized based on the amount of resources. Just take out the National Science Foundation.gov. Just go to that website and look at the top 20 institutions that are producing our engineers, our physicists, our computer scientists, any of our biologists, any of our STEM fields, and you will find predominantly HBCUs listed there. So that means that even with all the compounding of the lack of resources, we're still able to pull these rabbits out of the hat and produce 84% of the judges and the majority of the lawyers and the doctors. I mean, Xavier produces more of the physicians in this country than any other college or university. That's absurd. To have colleges that are so under-resourced producing so much of the human capital and intellectual capital of this country. So it says to you, when corporations and individuals and foundations finally have had this awakening, if they make real investments, the returns would be just staggering.
Yes, yes. As you've pointed out, so much tremendous talent and really under-recognized resources in terms of human capital at these institutions. I want to talk a bit about a related topic, and that's the ability to build the university endowment. And I think we have a graph to show the largest HBCU endowments. And of course, Dr. Campbell Spellman has the distinction of being among those top 3 or 4 or 5. What are the keys to success in building these endowments? How critical is alumni giving? Another thing that I certainly know about Spellman is that you guys always punch really high in terms of the percentage of alumni who give to the university. What is it that Spellman does that has enabled the school to get to such a large percentage of alumni giving and to build a pretty formidable endowment?
So alumni giving is important, but I think in all honesty, building endowments really require major gifts to launch it, and then superb management to accelerate the growth of the endowment. And frankly, Spellman had a great deal of luck at the beginning of its birth. We were named after Laura Spellman Rockefeller, her family, the family of John D. Rockefeller, and then John D. Rockefeller Jr. continued making investments. Somewhere in the 70s, we got a bequest that when it matured, gave us an extraordinary basis on which to build an endowment. And God bless us, we had a man by the name of Robert Daniel Flanagan, who was at the college for 50 years and turned out to be a genius. I mean, a genius when it comes to endowment management. So that now our endowment is close to $500 million. And we're very proud of that, but it was because we happened to be at a certain time in our history the beneficiaries of some largesse, right? And then the beneficiaries of superb management. So that is, in my view, that was a lucky turn of events for Spelman College.
Yes, yes.
I want to make one comment around the systemically changing the uneven funding, because I think something that Dr. Simmons and Dr. Campbell said, I just want to harken back to. Being on the inside as a corporation giving donations, what I can tell you honestly is that CEOs change, corporate priorities change, presidents of foundations change. And in order to really break the cycle of that uneven funding, there are a number of things that I think are absolutely critical. Yes, the initial program that gives the funding, but that must be a multi-year program, at least 5 years, 10 years, even more. Our HBCU Market Madness program, for instance, is a 5-year commitment. Our 1 Million Black Women Initiative, for which we're graced to have Dr. Simmons on our advisory council, is a 10-year, $10 billion commitment. So that multi-year announcement and commitment, I think, is really critical. Potentially having individuals from the corporation that are on the board of the organization, the board of the HBCU, is another way to sort of institutionalize it. The way we think about it is, as I think about our commitment, long after I've left Goldman Sachs and long after David Solomon, is no longer the CEO of Goldman Sachs, what will our commitment be to HBCUs? And that's what we're looking to build over time, and getting our people invested, hiring more people, because the more people you hire, you attract more people. They earn more money over time. They get into the donation stream. They recruit more individuals. And so I think it's that cycle of, the things that I just mentioned, those 4 elements, that I think are absolutely critical to really sort of systemically change the tide of uneven funding.
Yes. Dr. Kimbrough, I'd like to ask you, for example, in this past year, I think at Dillard, you guys are among the institutions that received funding from McKinsey Scott. That funding, some of that will go to your endowment. That's right. You have the freedom to use it as you see fit. Will some go to the endowment, or some go to operations? For example, how does that impact your endowment at a school like Dillard?
Right. So, those are the conversations we continue to have. We started off using the funds for capacity building. So in this new environment, and we're limited in terms of how we can recruit, we use some of that money to really bolster some of our enrollment management plans and use some additional services to identify some high achieving students that we could reach. We use some other as a part of just the overall branding of the institution, because as the other presidents have mentioned, I think, the confidence in the leadership and people knowing about the institutions helps to attract some of those larger gifts. And so for a lot of people, Dillard is still not a household name. And I always tease people to say we're in an interesting position. If you look at the report done by the Associated Press this summer, we were number 5 in terms of endowment per student. And people wouldn't think about it like that. So you're not in terms of the big household names, but, with the over $100 million endowment and 1,200 students, we're averaging over $70,000 per student in terms of endowment, which is very high for HBCUs. So we want to still build some of that brand and name recognition that will help attract some of those major gifts, and we can tell some of those stories about, our high achieving academic programs. So we have some flexibility. We've done a really good job with our board in terms of some of that management. So you do have board members say, let's put more in the endowment. Let's keep growing the endowment as well, because that's really good for permanence. But some of it we have to use in terms of some capacity building now. How can we address some of those issues that we have right now that will give us greater flexibility going down the road? So those are the things we're doing with it. But it's great when you do have that level of flexibility and you just say, here's $5 million, you use it as you see best. That's been a great blessing.
Yes. What about, before we close, what about calls to action? I should point out that leadership is obviously critical at these institutions, and 2 of our 3 presidents have announced that they are leaving their respective institutions. Congratulations, Dr. Campbell, on your forthcoming retirement. And Dr. Kimbrough, you've announced your resignation at Dillard at the end of this school year as well. So leadership is clearly an ongoing critical issue, as evidenced here. What other calls to action? And please, whoever would like to start.
If I may, the one thing I want to emphasize is that these institutions belong to the nation, it's true, but more importantly, they belong to us. And so it is our duty to support them. So I'd like to see every person who has benefited from HBCUs to make a commitment to contribute to these institutions in an ongoing way. We should not simply rely on others to support HBCUs. A good deal of the reason that some people will support us is because they see that our supporters are involved and that they are committed and they are committed to give. And not enough of us are giving. And so that to me is even more important in a way than some of the large gifts that we're giving, for us to understand at a profound level that this is our duty as a community to support these institutions.
Yes, well said. With that, because I know we're out of time, I'd like to just really express the deepest gratitude to each one of you for having this conversation, but more than that, for the really important work that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For more than 75 years, UNCF, the United Negro College Fund, has worked to combat deep-rooted obstacles to higher educational access, achievement, and career success, annually providing financial and educational support to our 37-member historically Black colleges and universities. Please give what you can. UNCF, our HBCUs, and our students appreciate you and your donation, no matter how big or small. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Thanks for joining us this afternoon for the panel looking at HBCUs, ending the era of half measures, particularly looking at the systemic inequities that HBCUs have been subjected to over the years, and then also how the Biden administration and also the members of Congress are looking to remedy this. With us, we're joined with esteemed panelists, Representative Alma Adams, founder of the HBCU Caucus, and also the White House's senior advisor to the president and director of outreach, Cedric Richmond. Both have a long history of helping and advocating for HBCUs, so we're delighted that they can join us and share their insight. And so we'll start with you, Representative Adams. You're, as I mentioned, you chair the HBCU caucus. You have different bills and vehicles right now in the pipeline, the IGNITE Act being one of those, to look at helping HBCUs. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and in your work?
Well, first of all, let me bring greetings from my 12th district here in North Carolina and all of the citizens I represent. And from the Congressional Bipartisan HBCU Caucus, we're bipartisan, we're bicameral, 109 members now, and dedicated all to the cause of making sure that HBCUs and their students survive. I do want to acknowledge all of the folks who are a part of this today, as well as my co-chair, Representative Hill, and then our senior advisor to President Cedric Richmond, the great state of Louisiana, who I've had the privilege of serving with in the House. I'm a two-time graduate of an HBCU, North Carolina A&T, 40 years at Bennett College as a professor and administrator there. So I have a really good insight as to HBCUs and how important they are. Now, I've got to tell you that when I came to Congress, I wanted to continue my support for HBCUs, and which is why I started the bipartisan HBCU caucus, and we've worked very diligently to make sure that we kind of keep HBCUs out there. But so let me just speak a moment since you asked me about IGNITE. We're doing a number of things, and right now our focus is on the IGNITE HBCU Excellence Act, and it's going to authorize a new grant program, and every HBCU can compete for funding for various purposes, from renovation to repair, modernization, or construction of new campus facilities, including installing high-speed broadband. Now, we know that our schools are almost 2 centuries old, and many of their buildings are. And so we have some really serious issues on our campus in terms of infrastructure across this United States. There are about 102 HBCUs, and they are in serious need of repair on their campuses. $25 billion in deferred maintenance. And why? Because we've not gotten the kind of funding that other schools have received. And we've done the best that we could do with the little that we've had, but yet we've still been able to educate some very fine young people. So we're pushing forward. We've got, I'm very supportive of the infrastructure bill, but I just believe that we cannot leave out our HBCUs. We need to build back better, but we also need to make sure that in building back better, that we build our HBCUs back better too, because they were the schools who educated people that look like me, you, and Cedric Richmond here, when other schools would not let us in. We were founded for the purpose of educating Black kids, and before 1964. So that's kind of a unique situation for our schools. We are HBCU strong, and of course, we want to continue to have the opportunity to remain strong, to survive, but also to thrive.
Gotcha. And Director Richmond, I mean, the White House has a record number of HBCU graduates, including yourself and Vice President Kamala Harris. Speaking to Representative Adams' point as well, President Biden has consistently invoked HBCUs, talked about the talent in the pipeline with HBCUs, and also said that he wants to put, HBCUs in the center of his overall, this centerpiece of equity that you all are looking to address. Can you talk about some of the initiatives that the White House has in the pipeline for HBCUs, the vision that you and the president have for helping these institutions?
Well, we have a president now who consistently talks about racial equity and breaking down systemic racism. You heard him say it in his inaugural address and an address to a joint session of Congress. And so you can't tackle systemic racism and racial equity without bolstering up and investing in HBCUs. So through the American Rescue Plan, you saw us put about $4.2 billion into our HBCUs, which was probably the largest investment in history. But it's not, and it can't be a one-off thing. It has to be consistent. So that's why you saw us propose $239 million in our budget for HBCUs, including about $72 million in discretionary spending. HBCUs, and this is what I stress, if you look at African-American doctors, lawyers, teachers, and others, a lot of those professionals come through HBCUs, and they play a very critical role. And so as we shape our future, HBCUs are going to have to play a bigger role because what they do is unique and vitally important. So we're going to continue to invest in HBCUs, and we're going to put money where our mouth is.
Sure. And Representative Adams, you kind of alluded to some of the infrastructure opportunities here, particularly exposed throughout, our entire education system with COVID kind of exposed some of these deficiencies broadly, but of course, acutely with some of the HBCUs. What are some of the challenges that you've heard from leaders of the institutions, and what are some of the opportunities that you think that we can address pretty quickly here?
Well, thank you very much for your question. And again, I just appreciate President Biden's interest and support for HBCUs and all the things that we currently have. And he mentioned the different pieces of legislation that we've had. Clearly, they've helped us to eliminate some of the debt on these campuses, to provide scholarships for students. But I'd be remiss if I didn't first elaborate on the infrastructure challenges that many of the presidents and chancellors have shared with me. Most of the HBCUs, if not all of them, have difficulty in terms of difficult financial situations. After years of underfunding, institutional neglect, many of the buildings have ruptured pipes and broken sidewalks and campus blackouts and buildings that aren't climate controlled. So these are physical manifestations of the lack of funding that HBCUs face. So when they do receive grant funding, sometimes that funding is really, most of the time, it's much less than their predominantly white institution counterparts. And so they've got to make tough choices. And so they have to decide whether to invest in their students, their faculty, or in their physical infrastructure. Most of our schools have chosen to invest in their students because folks who work at HBCUs are passionate about their colleges. So if you look at what they've done in the midst of the pandemic, despite their limited resources, they've canceled student debt and all these things. But that shows the commitment that our schools have. That's why I stayed at Bennett College for 40 years. But we've got to remove that false choice that there's no reason, in my opinion, why half of the HBCU facilities need repair or replacement. So we've heard from leadership also that in addition to those infrastructure challenges, that they are disadvantaged when competing for public and private resources. So when they have to compete for grants and contracts, they're forced to compete with larger, better resource institutions. And so that's why this bill that we're talking about is very important, and that we make sure that it has the kind of equity in there in terms of competing. So we shouldn't have to fight for crumbs. We've been under-resourced for so many years, but we've got to build on the sources of institutional aid programs that currently exist. And if we do this with the goal of creating opportunity for students, then our schools and our young people will be better off.
Yes. And Director Richmond, as you alluded to, the talent pipeline, the doctors, the lawyers, but then again, you all at the White House last week just highlighted a lot of the talent there in the administration as well. We know that representation matters. We know that perception matters as well. And so there are success stories, plenty of success stories emanating out of HBCUs, yours and Vice President Harris is being one of them. What does that mean that there are so many HBCU alums in the administration, and how do you seize that moment and seize that type of momentum that we're seeing?
Well, I think that it's our values. And if you look at HBCU representation in the administration is significant because we were intentional about doing it. If you look at Michael Regan over the EPA, he's a North Carolina A&T graduate, and he's over the Environmental Protection Agency, and which is very important to communities of color. If you look at environmental justice. So we, again, look at racial equity as one of our main pillars of this administration. And if you're going to do it, you have to make sure that you have talented African Americans at the table, because this is not an administration that thinks that we're going to help Black people in spite of Black people. Actually, what we think is we're going to invite and really push African Americans to be at the table, to be co-architects of their future, because nobody knows what they need better than African Americans. And so if you look at the vice president, if you look at the White House, we really want to make sure that we have African Americans at the table in real meaningful positions, and not just leadership positions shaping the African American community, but shaping the nation and domestic and foreign policy as well. And so we want to make sure that people understand in a very clear manner, crystal clear matter of fact, what HBCUs mean to this country. We've underfunded public education, K through 12, forever. And HBCUs take those students and they polish them into fine gems, leaders in the community, leaders around the world, and it makes the country a better place. And so you heard Congresswoman Adams talk about it. These schools have their infrastructure plan has been duct tape and glue for decades. And just imagine what they could do if we invest real money in them, so that they can build state-of-the-art infrastructure, state-of-the-art science labs, and all of those things. I mean, look, we have never, ever in the African community equated wealth with talent. However, that doesn't mean that we enjoy being underfunded in our endeavor to educate African Americans. And so this administration understands that. We're going to invest in it. And I think the sky's the limit where we go from there.
Yeah, if I can add something, in terms of the value of these young students who graduate from HBCUs and having alumni at the highest levels of government, such as Advisor Richmond and Vice President Harris, it's a great thing because it draws the awareness to HBCUs, to their narrative, and to the needs that we have. So it's valuable to have alums in the highest echelons of government. You can be what you see. So students will be able to see what's possible with an education at an HBCU. For me, I walked the ghetto streets of Newark, New Jersey. My mom did domestic work. We didn't have any money, first generation. I was able to complete a bachelor's and master's from North Carolina A&T, go on to get my PhD from the Ohio State University. Why? Because of the North Carolina A&T and HBCU. So, oftentimes our schools face this perception of being less than. So having alumni in those places, such as in the White House, does acknowledge the opportunities that an HBC education can provide. So I just wanted to add that and just say that, again, as I tell young people, you can be what you see. So they've got to see it.
And you all operate, of course, in the halls of Washington and move with the gears out here in D.C. Is there a role that the private sector, that individuals can play in helping move along some of these initiatives?
Well, I
Absolutely.
think. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'll be very quick. Absolutely. If you look at other institutions that have billion-dollar endowments, the private sector can make sure that they level the playing field in that way. They can give money to institutions that are going to use it. The return on the investment is enormous. And so when they look at HBCUs, my push would be to invest serious dollars in those institutions. And so it gives them capacity building and all the other things that they can do. And I think it's a wise investment. I think it's a needed investment. And I just encourage, to the extent that ethics allows me, to encourage those companies to do that.
Yeah, let me just add, businesses we can support HBCUs in a variety of ways. Cedric has mentioned some, but businesses can recruit on HBCU campuses. They can hire HBCU graduates. You're hearing a lot today about private sector companies. They're beginning to reevaluate, rethink the value of diversity in the wake of the racial justice movement across the country. They're now actively seeking to recruit diverse talent. And so because I recognize that, and some of my colleagues and I, the partnership challenge began because of that, which gets the private sector involved. The HBCU partnership challenge does give the private sector an opportunity to first of all recognize the importance and the impact of HBCUs to the economy, to the principles of corporate diversity and inclusion. And then it asks that recognition, as Cedric has said, be supported by greater investment, greater engagement to ensure that the HBCUs can continue to prepare diverse talent for our workforce. If you're looking for young people who can do all of these things, who've had tremendous academic support. The pipeline is with the HBCU. So our partnership challenge right now, we have over 71 members. It spans across industries such as tech, financial sector, agriculture, and telecom. And we recently had some to join the challenge just this week. So I do as well encourage businesses to invest in both action to uplift the role of these schools and to understand the enormous role that they play economically as well as academically and societally.
Mm-hmm. Are there challenges with some of these vehicles, these legislative vehicles, in terms of reaching bipartisanship consensus at all? Are HBCUs subjected to that type of partisanship at all, or are things pretty seamless?
Well, let me begin by saying, really, most of our HBCUs, because of the way the districts have been drawn and redrawn and gerrymandering and all those things, most of them really live in Republican districts. So I've never believed that that education is a partisan issue. You need to have it, whether you're talking about four-year education or anything else. I mean, you really need to be prepared for the world of work, regardless of what you're going to do. But I've got to tell you that basically I've had the experience of working across the aisles, and I think that that my Republican colleagues are beginning to realize that we do have, there's a lot of value in these schools. So if you look at the Ignite bill, all of the partners that we have, we've got over 97 members, co-sponsors of that bill. Again, I mentioned the numbers of folks who have taken on the partnership challenge and so forth. So my coach, and we have co-chairs. For example, my co-chair in the House is Representative Hill. We have, and then we have vice chairs in the House, also Republicans and Democrats. Terry Sewell on the Democrat side, Representative Turner on the Republican side. And then in the Senate, we have Senator Coons, who is a co-sponsor of this bill, along with Senator Tim Scott. So we're doing pretty good there. But I think, it's about educating people and helping them to understand not only the value that we bring, but the discrimination financially in terms of support from government that we've seen over the years that have really not helped our schools do what we know they can do.
And Advisor Richmond, how do you see the White House's role in terms of prodding Congress to move some of this legislation along? Of course, the president has his care packages in terms of human infrastructure that's been a big centerpiece of the administration's efforts. How do you see the White House's involvement in terms of just kind of prodding Congress on these issues?
Well, one, we have to include it in all the things that we send to Congress, and we have to make sure that they understand it's a priority. And the Congresswoman has been a leader on HBCU initiatives and making sure that she keeps them at the forefront. And we're going to continue to support her in her work on the Education and Labor Committee under Bobby Scott to make sure that it's important. It's been an important issue for the Congressional Black Caucus since its inception. And I think that Congresswoman Adams has taken it to the next level. So part of it is for us to, one, continue to push, but one, to publicly advocate for it so people know exactly where we stand in terms of making sure that HBCUs have the resources and the investment that they need to succeed. So we view it as a partnership with Congress, and we will continue to tell them that it's a priority and support where we can.
What do you all say to those that would posit that HBCUs have served their function, and in 2021 with integration, et cetera, that they don't have a role to play going forward? What would you all say to those type of criticisms?
Well, I would say you need to do your research. HBCUs are still absolutely necessary, even in 2021. We know why the schools were created. They're needed now just as much as they were when we organized many of these schools in the basements of churches and so forth. But the doors of HBCUs are open to all students today. But the existence of our HBCUs continue to serve as a reminder of why we were created in the first place. Why? Because students who looked like us could not go anywhere else. They were created in the face of slavery, and they continue to shine bright in the face of segregation. So they're still needed today to remind us of where we were, where we are now, and where we should go, always toward equality and equity. So furthermore, HBCUs have dedicated faculty and staff to support students. And I know this personally because of the teaching that I did at Bennett College for 4 years, because of the educational experiences and the support I received at North Carolina A&T, going in as a student who was not fully academically prepared, but they made an investment in me. They saw something in me. They molded and shaped me into what they knew I could become. And that's what HBCUs are still doing today. So students have the opportunity to learn at our unique colleges and universities, which really offer strong academic training and a window into living history. So yes, we need to keep our HBCUs not just surviving, but thriving.
I would just say that we need them now more than ever. If you look at under-resourced public schools, if you look at the products that they're turning out across the country, this is how I judge HBCUs, and I got this from Dr. Kimbrough at Dillon University. We should look at it like Olympic diving. If you jump off the diving board and you just do an easy dive, no splash, you're not going to get a very high score because it had 0 degree of difficulty. And if you look at the product or the input that HBCUs get coming from these under-resourced public schools around the country, and they get students that are academically, some students are academically not necessarily ready, but they take them, they push them, they nurture them, they invest in them, they sow in them, and they produce great leaders. And so I think now, if you look at it, it is something that we absolutely need right now. And so my position would be that they are very much needed right now. And as we talk about diversity and inclusion, and we push this social justice agenda and equity, we need those leaders from HBCUs to lead that movement, because that's what they have been taught to do at HBCUs.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think that's a proper way to end this panel. I want to thank again Representative Adams and also the White House's senior advisor to the president, Cedric Richmond, for the time today. Really do appreciate your time and your valuable insight, both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. HBCU strong. Cedric, I'll be in touch with you. Okay?
Absolutely.
I'll be reaching out to you. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, my brother.
Thank you, Mark.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
I'm David Weston, and we're delighted to have with us now Senator Tim Scott, Republican of South Carolina. So, Senator Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. We're talking about historically black colleges and universities across the country, something you've taken a particular interest in. Tell us why. Why are they important to this country?
Well, David, if you think about the professional class of African Americans who are college educated, you would realize that half of all the professionals in this country doing excellent work in many different fields comes from HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. So when you support HBCUs, you support the engine that creates professionals from lawyers, doctors, and military generals. Our general officers, nearly half of all general officers in the military have come from or come through an HBCU. Doctors, teachers, lawyers, engineers all find their start in a historically black college or university. And in South Carolina, we are home to a number, 8 HBCUs. And the truth is that our state is better because we have options for kids to be highly educated, incredibly competent, and then very productive in the workforce. So I'm a supporter of common sense. And this, in my opinion, is one of the ways that I see common sense coming to fruition in education.
So, Senator, as you understand it, why is that the case? Why is it the case that historically black college and universities so over-index, so overperform in turning out particularly professionals, for example, for our society? In this day and age, why do they do that?
Well, I think it's the history of education that's just as important as the present day in education. Historically, for many African Americans in the 60s and before, access to college education was very limited. And so HBCUs, though they were founded 100 years ago plus, for many of the institutions, they provided a springboard of opportunity for many African Americans in the late 1800s and into the early 1900s. That excellence continues through the 21st century. Access to quality education has been a struggle that we have been making great advancements on in the last several years. The good news is today's HBCUs are very diverse. You think about Kentucky State University, which is an HBCU, it has about 45% of its student population non-African American. And so what we're seeing in today's HBCUs is that we have the type of diversity we see across the country now populating the chairs and the desks of HBCUs throughout the country.
So how are they doing from your point of view? I think there's something like 101, I read, HBCUs across the country. How are they doing? Because I've heard some reports that perhaps some attendance is down, some enrollment is down over the last several years.
Yeah, there's no doubt that if you think about HBCUs from a monolithic perspective, it's hard to get a gauge on how well they're doing. If you think about the type of diversity that we see in this country, you have diversity within the HBCU footprint. So some are doing very well. I mean, we have flagships across the country. At Tuskegee, you have Morehouse, you have South Carolina State, Claflin, Voorhees, of course, all South Carolina schools. At North Carolina A&T, one of the largest HBCUs, if not the largest HBCU in the country, doing very well. Kentucky State has a new president, so to speak, last couple of years from Charleston, South Carolina. They're doing extremely well. You also have flagship of Howard here in the D.C. area that's doing well. The question really is, how do we make sure that the firepower that's coming out of HBCUs and the institutions themselves that were for too long without adequate funding, making sure that the playing field is level for those HBCUs going forward. I am thankful that during the previous administration, we saw HBCU funding hit its highest level in the history of the country. And for the first time ever, we made it permanent funding. That will change the game going forward for the rest of our history as a nation. And frankly, even during the pandemic, we provided more than $1 billion of emergency funding for HBCUs. We did infinitely more for colleges and universities throughout the country. So what we've understood here in our nation is what we are focusing on all across the spectrum in education, and resourcing it effectively means that we're going to have better, brighter youngsters leading our country in the right direction for generations to come.
You mentioned the Trump administration, and I know that President Trump was quite proud, I believe, of what they did for HBCUs in the administration at that point. At the same time, you also point out some of the financial considerations, because there are indications a lot of the students of color who go to HBCUs have a tougher time financially, and the schools themselves don't have the endowments we typically have in some of the other universities across the country. What do they need most right now, HBCUs across the country?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. That I always look for the secret sauce, and there's never one simple ingredient to the secret sauce of success or significance. And in HBCUs, that's the same as well. One of the things I would suggest is that the alumni associations have a greater opportunity to play a significant role in funding or resourcing the HBCUs and playing a vital role in advocating on behalf of the HBCUs. They do a pretty good job now. We could always do a better job, and I think that's something that I'm starting to see across the country as I get phone calls from alumni associations looking to become more engaged in the process. I started a HBCU fly-in where I brought the presidents and chancellors together about 6 years ago for the first time so that they could advocate on behalf of themselves before Congress and the White House. And because of those efforts, we've seen Pell Grants go up, year-round Pell Grants become available, and more resources. And another part of that secret sauce is the private sector. Ultimately, education is about getting a job. And one of the things that the chancellors and presidents requested from me was more interfacing with the private sector. And so one of the fourth or the fifth fly-in, we focused on getting the private sector more engaged, more involved with HBCUs, especially using virtual opportunities to invite the student to an interview to make sure that they have the same access and opportunity, even if they're not in the same region of the jobs. And that has proven to be a powerful part of that secret sauce as well. And then what we're working on today and in the next few years, I believe, is making sure that the maintenance issues on campuses, we have historically they have a large footprint of historically significant buildings on these campuses that have been at times in disrepair. Others needed maintenance and others are doing well. But we are trying to focus our attention on making sure that the infrastructure is as well funded as is any other college or university in the country.
Senator Scott, tell us about that. I think it's called the IGNITE. That's the acronym for the bill that you're working on. It's a bipartisan bill, as I understand it, to really invest in the infrastructure in a broad sense in the HBCUs. Tell us about that bill.
Yeah, everything needs an ignition. And one of the things that we do with the IGNITE Act is we literally provide HBCUs with the resources necessary to take care of the maintenance. Yeah, when I was a younger fella working for the first time on a performance audit committee for the state of South Carolina, the one thing that it came true and clear to me in the late 90s was that too many of our educational institutions, even on the K through 12 side, didn't have a maintenance budget, as if we didn't know we were going to have to maintain buildings. There was so much money invested in the structure itself, but too little resources set aside for the maintenance. That seems to be the case with roads, with bridges, with ports, with airports, and unfortunately with schools as well. And so what we try to do is find a way to strike an appropriate balance in the legislation. The House and the Senate versions are slightly different. We anticipate that our appropriators will be able to determine what the need really is. And so as opposed to being overly prescriptive as it relates to a number, I expect our committee structures to allow for us to evaluate and then to identify the appropriate resourcing on an annual basis to be appropriated to those universities and colleges, specifically HBCUs, as it relates to the maintenance obligation and responsibility that they have.
So I find that particularly interesting because I didn't see a number, an overall number, X amount of money to go for it. Well, I think what you're saying is you're not putting a number in, you're trying to put together a process where each year you'll determine how much. Is that the proposal? Because I'm not familiar with that way of approaching it.
Yeah, it's a different approach. The House put in, I think, $5 billion in their bill. They had flirted with numbers that were even higher. My thought was this: let's take a step back from being overly prescriptive on the amount of dollars that we need. Let's evaluate the need, and then let's fund that need over a meaningful amount of time so that we do the right thing, and that what we're not asking for is special treatment of our HBCUs. What we are asking for is a level playing field within the structure of a higher education that did not exist previously. Now we have a chance to do it right, not make up for the past, but to invest in the future. And that's a very big difference as I look at what we're trying to accomplish. And so with that as a goal and the objective, I want there to be a process that we identify and evaluate the needs being submitted. And that process will help us to determine the amount of resources that are necessary. And then we fund the portions of it that we can, and we come back to fight and live to fight another day next year. That process to me is an important engagement, and it's the way that we maintain a responsible level of funding, but we also maintain a responsible level of oversight to make sure that we are doing the best we can with tax dollars, which of course is really your dollars and the dollars of your friends and your neighbors and loved ones. So we want to make sure that we use those dollars as wisely as possible.
And as worthwhile as this cause is, there are a lot of people clamoring for a lot of dollars right now on Capitol Hill.
Yes.
There's a big process going through, whether it's the reconciliation or the infrastructure. I can go on and on. Are you having difficulty making progress, given the fact that there are so many people asking for things right now?
Well, certainly we found a pretty good, I found a good appetite on the Hill for talking about higher education and specifically HBCUs. Where the problem is, of course, is the level of spending that we are talking about on Capitol Hill, in my opinion, is way too high. But it also lacks the type of process that I've just described for HBCUs and the infrastructure and the maintenance needs within those institutions. I'm willing to take a look at what we need, not just what we want. And when you look at the spending here on Capitol Hill, you think about the $1.9 trillion COVID package, followed by a $1.2 trillion infrastructure package, followed by up to a $3.5 trillion new definition of infrastructure, family infrastructure plan, and then you tack on top of all of that a $4 trillion annual spending plan. That's about $10.5, $10.6 trillion in one fiscal year, which in my opinion is actually irresponsible, and that I'll be voting against much of that. But the truth is that if we were to take a step back and evaluate the needs, that number would come down significantly, and our ability to make progress on our priorities that actually fall in the laps of your federal government, we would make more progress if we had more focus and used a harness as opposed to just using the shotgun approach, trying to send money everywhere, especially when you evaluate the fact that in the 5 packages that we passed in 2020, we have hundreds of billions of dollars that have not yet been spent. So the question isn't how much. The answer is too much. The question is, are we actually hitting the target? I think what we're going to find out as a nation is that we missed a target because we had no target. That will not be the way that we act through the legislation that I'm looking at and working on.
Senator, you mentioned a level playing field. You've been active in really supporting HBCUs for some time. As I understand, we already have a statute in place, in part because of you dealing with federal agencies to basically say there's a level playing field in dealing with HBCUs. Tell us what progress you've made already.
Well, we've made a lot of progress, and you can see the definition of progress are the resources being deployed to HBCUs from different parts of the federal government. One specific part that has been increasing over the last few years is military engagement with our HBCUs. As we think about the STEM future of this nation and the world, we must make sure that we have diverse candidates as a part of that process. I think we get there by investing in our HBCUs from our military so that we have more candidates understanding and appreciating the necessity of a strong military apparatus to keep us safe and secure as a nation. And the more investment you have in these HBCUs from our military, the more investment you'll get from the students as it relates to our national security apparatus. I think it's a win-win scenario. It's one of the opportunities that we have to see more innovation and creativity that benefits every single American coming through and from our HBCUs. So it's good news for our country. I'm a kid that grew up in the Deep South that appreciates the fact that we're all better together. And frankly, one of the ways that we get there is to make sure that every single American feels like this is our country and we are one American family. When we point the resources all across this nation in a responsible way, I think we have that sense of belonging and a sense of responsibility that grows out of the sense of belonging. So this is a good thing, and we can measure the success. And if we can't measure it, we probably shouldn't do it.
Finally, Senator, put the HBCU role in our society in a larger context. We have been through more than one tragedy, I would say, in this country over the last couple of years. One of them certainly is the pandemic and what it's done to all of us. Killed so many people, really hurt our economy. But beyond that, we had real racial tensions brought to the fore again with George Floyd and so many other incidents. A lot of concern about it. Is that affecting the attitude toward HBCUs? And particularly, go back to what you said earlier about the private sector. Is the private sector more likely to step up and help now? Because one of the problems I think many people think is a real inequality historically, including in educational opportunity.
Well, you know, one of the things I love about America, and one of the reasons I'm so proud to be an American, is that when all the chips are down and there's a challenge, we all seem to come together. We saw that through the pandemic. One of the things that we see with our HBCUs in the midst of the pandemic is that too many kids, when we're talking about virtual education, they didn't have broadband connections at their homes. HBCUs served as hotspots for so many kids, millions of kids in rural America, frankly, as much as the inner cities of America, because once again, the diversity of the HBCU student population has never been more diverse. When we think about about responding to some of the social tragedies that we see, unfortunately, too often on TV stations. What we know is that our HBCUs are providing excellence in education, which leads to excellence in economic mobility and opportunity. I'll make it more personal than even all of that. In Charleston, South Carolina, we had the Mother Emanuel church shooting, and 9 amazing people lost their lives, were murdered in that church shooting. The vast majority of those folks who lost their lives attended an HBCU somewhere in South Carolina. And very quickly, 36 hours after the shooting, those loved ones of those family members came before a camera, just like we were talking today, and they forgave the killer of their family members. A part of that is a foundation that was laid through faith-based organizations like HBCUs in South Carolina. The role of understanding how you respond to tragedy. So not just the educational component, not just the financial component, but what it means to be at the top of the understanding of what it means to be an American. A part of that ethos comes through institutions like historically Black colleges and universities. And without that type of leadership, I'm not sure where my state would be today. And so, as I said during some of the funeral services, as I said during some of the challenges, sitting there through funeral after funeral after funeral, I was incredibly thankful for an anchor in our state, which was, in fact, our historically Black colleges and universities, that was like a rudder to a ship.
It's so terribly powerful. I must say, I don't think any of us will forget those relatives of those lost ones down in South Carolina coming to camera, as you say, and forgiving the perpetrator. Thank you so very much, Senator Tim Scott, Republican of South Carolina.
Have a good day, sir. Thank you, David.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shirtia Brantley, Deputy New York Bureau Chief with Bloomberg, as well as Senior Editor for Bloomberg Live. And I am delighted to discuss how HBCU alums can leverage their platforms to boost these vital institutions with Kevin Liles, co-founder and CEO of 300 Entertainment. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, so great to have you here. We have a lot of ground to cover, so I just want to dig in. You have such a fascinating background, from working with Megan Thee Stallion to Jay-Z and many, many more popular acts. But I want to go back to the beginning. Growing up in Baltimore, can you expand on why you decided to attend Morgan State University?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why I decided to attend the HBCU. But one of the most important reasons was I had a guy named Joe Woodfolk that was one of my counselors at Woodlawn High School. And he recognized something in me because I was smart in math. I kind of was a problem solver for a lot of issues that we were having at the school. And he encouraged me to do engineering. You know, the funny thing about it, I never grew up wanting to be an engineer, but I love solving problems. And he said, you know, you should apply to Morgan State. There's a Nassau scholarship. And the next thing I knew, I graduated on June 10th, and I was in school at Morgan State on June 22nd. So it was a funny thing, and it was inspired by him. And thanks to Nassau and all the other people at Morgan State that helped me while I was there.
Mm-hmm. And as a fellow HBCU alum, I understand the importance of the support and encouragement that we receive from faculty and administrators there. Can you expand on how that support and encouragement impacted you during your time there?
Well, you know, when there's faculty and, you know, whether it's in sports or in engineering or in English, math, that look like you. Maybe as parents, they're going through the same things that your parents are going through. Maybe there's a beacon of light from a broken home. Then you go there and you see a professor that's diligent, a professor who's acting not in just his best interest as being a great teacher, but your best interest. That's inspiring for young people. where in Baltimore at 16 you're supposed to be in jail on drugs or dead. So when you see that inspiration around you, and not only faculty and the rest of the staff there, but other people, other kids that come from diverse backgrounds, some like you, but some not like you, because at the end of the day, everyone that goes to a HBCU didn't grow up poor. A HBCU is a fine institution that is necessary in the development of people of color as we go out into the world.
Mm-hmm. Now, you are definitely an active alum, having served as honorary chair for Morgan State's fundraising campaign for its 150th year anniversary a couple of years ago. That campaign raised more than $250 million from thousands of supporters. Why is alumni engagement so important to HBCUs?
Well, I think historically, a lot of people forget where they come from. But it's something about an HBCU. You can't forget from whence you came, because whether it's walking the yard or in the cafeteria or that favorite concert, or I have one of my favorite, teachers in engineering, Dr. Dean Deloach. You just remember the impact that moment or that event or that space that you gathered with your friends had, not just on your tenure in school, but on your life. And I find it disheartening that colleges and universities that are not HBCUs are endowed with billions of dollars. And I think it's Howard that has maybe $400 million in endowment, and the rest of them are 75, 100 million. We got a lot of work to do. So it's important that you never forget that kid that's the allows, or the kid that's the next Earl Graves, or the kid that's the next Kwasi Nkrumah, that you have to go back and you have to give back at a place that raised us. I always, think about the very people, comedians, White House correspondents, fashion designers, artists. A lot of people have come from Morgan, and I'm just blessed. And I'll always go back and give back, to the school that gave so much to me.
Mm-hmm. So you talked about the challenges these institutions have with endowments and such. So what can HBCU alums, as well as leaders from major companies, do to create more opportunities for students that graduate from these amazing institutions?
I think fundamentally we have to address the issue. This is not a today issue, and it's not a HBCU issue. It's an American issue. It's an issue that comes from systems being against us, oppressing us, over years and years, that have now allowed us to build sustainable wealth for people of color. So this is not my problem, or my mother's problem, or my grandfather's problem. This is a problem that we've had for centuries, and even going into 2022, I say, we're still not there, and still not in a place where even if you graduate, you have the same opportunity as someone that is not of your color. You can have the same resume, same grades, and you might not get a position at a business because of the color of your skin. And this, you think about, are we still dealing with these issues? Yes, we're still dealing with these issues. I'd rather fight a war on equality than some of the wars that we've been fighting for trillions of dollars and spending 20, 30 years and wasting great fathers and mothers' lives fighting something that we could be here fighting to make our country a better country.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier about the endowment situation. I believe Howard has an endowment north of $700+ million. But over the past year, we have seen the reckoning on race, post the killings of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and how that all sparked the global calls for justice, economic and racial justice. But only a few HBCUs are have received the attention prior to what we have endured over the past 18 months. What advice do you give to your fellow executive peers on going beyond the top 3, 4, or 5 HBCUs to seek out talent?
Well, I think it's not even taking a risk. It's use common sense. And 48% of my staff, senior staff, are people of color. 48% gender, how can I say, equality in my executive team. And half my staff is diverse. I make that a choice as a CEO. Every CEO has a choice to put leadership around them that looks like the people they are servicing. So it's one thing you want us to drink your drinks and eat your food and buy your clothes, but you don't want to employ the very people that come from the very communities that you're making the money in. I saw if I ever had the opportunity to be in any managed position, that I would change the statistic. And that's why, if I can do it with only, 67 people with a small company, I'm sure that many CEOs that have the opportunity for many other people to be hired, that they can take that opportunity. And I always speak. A lot of say, well, we don't know where they are. Well, I can give you a countless amount of HBCUs where they are. I can give you countless amount of people who call me every day just looking for an opportunity, whether they graduated with great grades in engineering, marketing, technology, science. They're out there, and I've dedicated my life also to making sure that the excuse is not that they're not there. No, they're there, and I know where they are, and let's set up some programs so they can help make your company even a better, more diverse and thoughtful company in the community.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about some of the initiatives that you yourself have worked on to create opportunities for talent. One is the Intern to CEO project that launched last year. Can you tell us a little bit more about that initiative?
A lot of people know my story from intern, president, and CEO. When I wrote the book, I didn't write it to tell people to make it happen and be like me. I told them my story, and really my story is the story of someone growing up with a rusty spoon in their mouth that didn't take that as the norm. And I took that statistic and went from the street corner to the corner office. And believed in entrepreneurship, believed in risk-taking, and think about all the risks that people have taken for us to even get here to where we are. And I can't sit breathing, have an opportunity to breathe and have all my hands, my eyesight, and the strength, and not pay forward for what people have given up for me to be able to vote, for me to be able to go to school, for me to be able to employ people and to make millionaires over the last 30 years. I can't do it on my watch, so I want to inspire people. And I think everybody has their own story and their own opportunity, but it was important to get back and say, hey, guys, I did go from intern to CEO, but you can too. I did start in engineering at a certain time in high school, but you could start. We had a Verizon Minority Mail Makers program that we did about 6 or 7 HBCUs where we had kids create apps and create 3D printing and things that they never would have had the opportunity to do. I've launched many music contests. One of the greatest ones I did, I gave $25,000 to whatever band, HBCU band, that could actually redo Hot of Young Thug and Gunna, and that went to FAMU. I constantly try to do things, and one of the last initiatives I did in June, I feel that we are underrepresented at the highest law enforcement, being the FBI, and you have actual agents out there in communities that they don't understand. So they making calls from a place of maybe of knowledge, but not from a place of the neighborhood, not from a place of what caused it, how it was caused, and what the community feels. And because the community is not talking, because they don't know the person, their person's not up their cloth. So I had like 30 HBCU presidents join me at the new facility down in Alabama, in Huntsville, Alabama, along with the director, along with his number 2 and number 3. And we committed to having a funnel of qualified students enroll in the highest law enforcement in our country, this FBI. Project Beacon.
Mm-hmm. Yes. How did you engage, or who came to you about the Beacon, Project Beacon program?
I think in my travels, whether it's on speaking circuits or friends of friends, me making sure that we are represented at all forms of law enforcement, all forms of businesses, is as important to me as being the CEO and founder of 300. And so I have a lot of friends who have me come and speak to me on this very issue with their chief diversity officers or speak at a Black History Month program or a Black Music Month program. And in this particular case, I spoke and I met a guy who said, you have to help us change what's going on here after the FBI. Top of the line, amazing people. But we need more people who look like us, who actually are committed to upholding the law, but equal justice for all, not just justice.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned entrepreneurship earlier and some of the initiatives you've done with some of our young students. How important is it for you to leverage your platform at 300 Entertainment to support artists who want to enter the industry as entrepreneurs, having that ownership mentality?
Yeah, I think, when you have nothing and you're able to turn nothing into something, you don't believe it's some secret sauce. I don't think God gave me anything other than my health and an opportunity and a community around me that believed in me. And it's important because independence is in my DNA. Independence to be a great father, independence to strive for freedom, independence to be a great leader, independence to be a great husband. And I work hard every day at that. And I feel that, if we all, found that DNA, the independent DNA in us. And just because you're independent don't mean you have to do it alone. It just means that you have the opportunity to think for yourself, to be yourself, to live and die by your choices in life. And I believe we all have that independence, and it's one of the most important things. And I look for people to work for me that share the same love. I said it's 3 things. There's right or wrong, good and bad, and treat people how you want to be treated. There is a more moral fiber at my company. There's a moral compass at my company that's around the more success, the more responsibility that you have. And it's been many countless of programs that we've done throughout the pandemic and before the pandemic that continues to separate us from other people who are in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Your roster at 300 Entertainment includes, Megan Thee Stallion, Young Thug, Gunna, and Fetty Wap, just to name a few. And of course, it continues to grow. How has your HBCU experience informed your ability to build this label and be a force in the industry that it is today?
Well, I always knew that, in Baltimore, there's Johns Hopkins and there's Morgan State. And there's a couple of other colleges. And I always felt like we were the underdog. We were the one that were looked over. And, whenever the underdog comes and wins, and if you go to Morgan now, you see it's probably providing some of the top, most of the top engineers in the country with jobs around the world. And Dr. Wilson has done an amazing job on the campus. I always felt like the underdog, the one that you think can't, is the one that will. And so to me, Morgan State, being a Morgan State Bear, having an opportunity to be around people that look like me and talk like me and walk like me and had some of the same successes, that I have. It was just inspiring, and I feel that it's now translated. Dr. Deloach said to me, Kevin, you're one of our most famous engineers. I said, Doc, what do you mean? He said, because you engineered your way through life. And to me, it was one of the greatest accomplishments and compliments that I could get from my dean. And it's just such an inspiration, man. The place, if it wasn't for Morgan State, I really would have to tell you, I might not be as good at what I do today, because I believe with the trials and tribulations that we're in to where we are now, those footsteps and footprints, as I said, it was a safe harbor in my storm called America.
Mm-hmm. Before we close, is there any additional thoughts you would like to leave with our audience today?
I think many people blame other people or their current position on why they can't do and why they won't do and shoulda, coulda, woulda in those particular cases. I believe God gave us all a gift. That gift we should share with the world. My gift is to inspire those to say, take nothing and make it something, so somebody can take something and make it even bigger. So, we're going to lead the foundation and continue to work as a great inspiration and small company that could. And congratulations to all my staff and all of you guys who voted us the best work company, best place to work for, and the #1 independent company in the country.
Mm-hmm. Well, we must leave it there. Thanks so much to Kevin Liles, co-founder and CEO of 300 Entertainment. I could speak with you all day. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you all for joining HBCUs, the Path to Prosperity event. We hope you enjoyed these conversations. Thanks again to all of our speakers for a wonderful program. And thank you to UNCF for helping make this virtual event possible. If you'd like more information from UNCF, please visit the resources tab on your screen. And most of all, thank you for being such an engaged audience. Thank you for watching.